Hey guys, welcome to Imminent Threat Solutions. Today we're going to be going through a comprehensive guide to escaping from illegal restraint. So what does that mean? Illegal restraint can mean anything that somebody uses against your will to restrain you. But I'm not talking about law enforcement here. This is completely separate from that. We're talking about criminals that have an intent to subdue you against your will. So they'll commonly employ different techniques such as zip ties, legally purchased handcuffs, which we'll get into, as well as duct tape and even rope. So we're going to be teaching you how to escape from each one of these methods with some tried and true methods that we have been practicing over the last few years. Escaping from zip ties and things like that have not always been, how do I say, looked upon fondly in certain communities. A lot of people think that some of the stuff that we had done in the very beginning back in 2009, when it wasn't very common, was kind of spilling secrets. So criminals have always known about these techniques, and it's nothing new. Most of these items can be picked up at a hardware store. So basically what we're going to be doing is walking through each one of those, as I mentioned, but please just keep in mind that these are for escaping from the criminal element. This is not law enforcement. So with that being said, let's get into the first segment, which is zip ties. All right, guys, so before we get into the zip ties, I want to briefly discuss a product that we've come up with just for escaping from illegal restraint. This has got some other applications, too, for kind of a more comprehensive escape and evasion kit, too, but I'm not trying to push a product here, but I will be showing certain things that are in this urban kit during this demonstration. Considering the fact that we've been at this for going on 6 years now, we've seen certain things through the process of testing all these different types of escape for ourselves that we've been able to put this into a comprehensive kit that we're calling the urban kit. So what the urban kit has in it are a bunch of different items. I won't get into it too much, but I will just reference things that are in here as we go through the video, just to not turn this into a product push. So back to the zip ties. So there are a couple of different kinds of zip ties that are on the market. First of all, I want to just clarify that what we're teaching doesn't fully have an application for law enforcement grade zip ties. These are practice cuffs from a company called Mil-Spec Plastics that makes the Cobra cuffs. These are kind of what traditionally you'll see. These are made by Safariland. These are traditional kind of law enforcement grade zip ties. Some of the cuffs nowadays even have a piece of metal in here that that can prevent you from making a friction saw and sawing through them, which we'll demonstrate once we get to that point. But just so you know, the techniques that we're going to teach aren't going to work on law enforcement grade stuff. These are restricted items anyway. You're not going to be able to get a hold of these. These were sent to us when we were doing a lot of testing on zip ties, so we retain these as samples, so that's why I even have them. So just so you know, this is to get out of zip ties that you can pick up for utility applications at a Home Depot or a Lowe's. So what we did in the beginning when we were doing these videos is I went to Lowe's and Home Depot and I looked for the strongest, baddest zip ties on the market. Something that I would grab if I were a criminal and I was trying to subdue someone like that. Basically red teaming the situation. So these are 175-pound test zip ties. These are the strongest ones we could find in the market. They come in a couple of different sizes. These are actually 24 inches. These are longer ones, which I'd recommend if you're going to practice this type of application. They come in a shorter length too, which we'll kind of get into here in a little bit too. But for the sake of this video, we're going to be using the 24-inch zip tie. So just to prove that this is a brand new package, I'm opening that for the first time. And these are straight out of the package. We'll get rid of all those. All right, so what you'll commonly find with most zip ties, and something that you need to remember, is that all you're defeating when you're defeating a zip tie is this little tiny piece of plastic. So all you've got is a small little slider or a locking bar that's standing between you and freedom. So that's important to remember. When the zip tie actually inserts, you hear the nice little clicking noise so that you know that it's activated and it's working. So as you can see, it's supposed to be a 175-pound test. in this direction that it's not supposed to let go. So the most common method of defeating these is kind of through a brute force attack, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. But the application I'd like to show first are some ideas that you can implement if you are in some type of subdued situation. So I don't ever like to say play the passive victim, or to be in a position where you're freely surrendering yourself to illegal restraint. But there are some pros in that situation, and there are some cons too. One, you wind up in the restraint, so that's obviously the con of the situation. But two, the pro is that you can actually try to game the situation, or game the criminal themselves. So through some ways of presenting your hands, you can actually game the situation. So let me show this real quick. Take off my watch, this stuff. So if you're presenting your hands to a criminal, there's a couple different ways of doing it. One, you can extend your arms out like this, and you can see already my elbow or my wrists are actually kicked to the side, so I'm kind of forming a V with my wrists. Well, that's creating separation. I'm not going to do this and basically give up my real estate unless they force me to do that. So by presenting my hands like this, the other thing I'm doing is actually flexing my wrist. So I like to do this demonstration too. So as you can see my wrist, as I put my fingers together, I can hardly touch. Now watch what happens when I actually make a fist. You can actually see my fingers spread apart a lot more when I flex my wrist. So that's the motion that I'd be doing as I'm presenting my wrist. So I'm squeezing my fist together, and I'm kind of, I guess, chicken winging my arms out a little bit as I'm presenting my hands. So if you'll come over, Rob, and zip tie me real quick, I'll demonstrate this method. So as I'm doing this, and these get tightened, tighten them harder. There you go. All right, so if a criminal was just looking to quickly subdue me, and now he thinks he's got me, if I just turn my wrists, that's super easy to slip out of. So if they're stupid enough and time is of the essence and they're in a hurry, that might happen. That might be your way out. So another thing you can do is, if they're trying to put your wrists together, you can try to actually cross your hands like this too. So same situation, I would flex my wrists as I'm crossing my hands. Let me get out another one so you can see that as well. All right, so that same application here. I'm going to cross my wrists and flex my hands. And hopefully that's how they restrain you, because as you can wiggle here, it can slip out that way too. Normally a criminal might use more pressure on these zip ties too, but that's just a quick demonstration of just showing just how it's almost like smoke and mirrors. You're presenting your hands in a way that they think that you're bound. I mean, obviously, if that's behind your back, you can do the same thing. You can cross your arms behind your back. You could, make this same position behind your back, and that's an option for you. I'm not saying it's going to always work, but hey, options are options, right? So let's get into the other situation too. So there's also another thing you can do, which is shimming. So as I was mentioning earlier, all that's standing between you and freedom is that little locking mechanism inside the zip tie. So, and if I had fingernails, which I don't right now, which I'm kind of a little irritated by, and I usually do, but you can actually use your fingernail to come right in here and push down on that locking bar. So I'm going to be using a shim from our little urban kit, or ITS little escape and evasion kit. And what I'm going to do is just insert this shim in here, and by using a little twisting motion, I can shim that zip tie right open. So all I'm doing, I'll show this in detail here, I'm coming right into this locking bar and I'm just pressing down on that little piece of plastic. So again, just remember that it's just a little piece of plastic standing between you and freedom. There's not a lot there, right? So shimming is something that you might be able to do right there on yourself. You may not be in the position to even shim those yourself, but if you have your hands free and you have access to something like one of these shims and it's on your person, if you're subdued with somebody else, there's a chance that you could move yourself over to them and be able to shim them out, and then they can help you get out too. So it's not always just about you. Try to think of it from that perspective as well. So that's what you can do on the shimming. So, and then kind of the coup de grace, so to speak, of getting out of zip ties is actually breaking them. And I'm going to demonstrate that you can break these in the same method using this configuration, which is a single zip tie, or a double configuration, so meaning to say that if these were around each one of your wrists, it's the same concept, it's the same principle. One thing to remember is that if you can, you always want to try to position the actual locking mechanism as close to center line as possible. So, you know, if you were to crank down these zip ties, you've obviously got a tail here. If you can get your mouth and teeth around that to maybe move that around into a more optimal position, you can. It may not always be feasible too, but that's not to say you can't break them without moving that into center line. It's just going to give you a better advantage, because it puts that mechanical advantage that you're using to break these right onto that locking mechanism versus another part of the zip tie. This is the weakest point though. It looks like the strongest point, but that's actually the weakest point of the zip tie, and that's where they always more commonly break from. If you're Superman, sometimes they'll actually snap on the zip tie themselves, and I've had that happen before, but more commonly, again, it's going to be right into the locking bar. So let's demonstrate this technique. All right, guys, so real quick before I actually put one of these on and break it, I want to go through the technique. So first of all, your hands are going to be together, you know, depending on the way that you've presented them or the way that you've been subdued, you're going to have something to this effect. So what you want to do, as I was saying, is kind of use that brute force to come over your head. And what you want to do is actually bend over and move your hands kind of like this. So you want to kind of try to chicken wing your elbows, but at the same time, you want to try to get your shoulder blades to touch together in the back. So the movement is like this. So as your hands come over, your shoulder blades are touching back here, and that's really the movement. So it's as hard as you can, and the idea is to push through your chest. So a lot of people will stop right there, and that's the end of it. They won't be able to break them. You actually have to pretend like your chest isn't there, and what that's acting like is a wedge. So the wedge is kind of continuing to spread your hands apart, and that force and the spread is what's going to actually break them. So, all right, here we go. All right. All right, and you can see those are cranked down pretty good. All right, so again, from over the head, just follow through. Ready? All right, so what we had is, as I was mentioning, that that locking bar is actually what broke. The tab that was actually locking did not snap. It was actually the entire housing there that broke. So again, just to demonstrate what actually breaks on that. All right, guys, so now let's do the double method, or the handcuff type method. So one thing that I recommend too is if you're doing this, that you tape up your wrists. It can get a little ridiculous on your wrists if you're continuing to practice this over and over again. All right, so same thing as before. All right, so as I mentioned with these, you can move these around with your teeth. You can grab the tail and kind of position those sliders if you have access to them. More than likely you will in this kind of method, because you'll basically be, you know, in both of these, so you know there's a longer tail if you're using heavy duty zip ties. All right, so same method as before. Come over the head and then tuck and follow through. All right. So this is a common thing that can occur too with the double method, is that one side will snap, but you'll still be left basically with one of these on. But you can still do everything you need to do, so it honestly doesn't even matter at that point. So I will cut myself out of this one. All right, so Moving on, one thing that I want to mention here too is that if you find yourself not able to get out of this method or not get out of the heavier duty 175-pound test zip ties, you can actually buy some smaller ones to start with, and you might even want to go this way. If you're trying to get your girlfriend prepared to do something like this, or your wife, this might be a good option as well. These are 75-pound tests versus 175-pound, and it sounds like a big difference, but you know, once the technique is everything, and that's what's important to understand. So you can put two of these little ones together like this, you know, and just practice with the smaller zip tie as well. So if you don't have the ability to break these, or you can't get to the position you need to be in to break them, there is another method called a friction saw. So what that is using a piece of cordage, and again, from that urban kit that I was bringing up before, we've got a piece of Kevlar cord in there, and what I'm going to demonstrate is how to tie the Kevlar cord and use it on your feet to basically saw right through the plastic on these zip ties. And the one thing that I want to mention here is that this same technique can be applied to law enforcement grade zip ties if you're not using, or if you don't encounter the ones that have that metal bar. But again, this is not to escape from illegal restraint by law enforcement, and that's not illegal anyway. I know some of you might disagree with me, but that's just the way I'm going to say it, because that's the way I believe. So at any rate, you know, when you're using things like the law enforcement grade, there's still a big, huge piece of plastic, and there's no way that you're going to saw through this in the same amount of time you could on a simple zip tie from the hardware store anyway. But just so you know, that's what we're going to be teaching with the friction saw method. So let's get into that method. All right, guys, so friction sawing out of zip ties. Again, this is the Kevlar cordage that we include with the urban kit. This is a very high strength line. It'll burn through zip ties very easily. So you can also use paracord. Paracord has been known to break once in a while. It's not super, it's not as tough as Kevlar in my opinion. Plus Kevlar is very slim and you can hide it somewhere on your person. And just so you know, the contents of that urban kit are not designed to just be all held in that container as well. They're made to be kind of put around your person. So at any rate, what I'm going to be doing with this Kevlar cord is I'm going to actually tie a bow line in each side, and then I'll use that as a way to bicycle my feet. So what I want to show is that, you know, if you stash this in a sock or something like that, you would you'd be able to just pull that out if you needed to. So I'm just going to basically wad this up and throw it in my shoe or my sock here, just to show that you can kind of access that if you had to kind of do this. So first of all, let me put on the zip ties. I should be able to do this one here by myself. All right, so if you're bound with zip ties here, let's move down to the feet here and I'll show you how we're going to actually do this. So if I'm going to go take out the cordage here. Now, if you're not familiar with tying a bow line, I would suggest watching one of our Knot of the Week videos. And I would also suggest tying bow lines in the end of this Kevlar cord before you're in the situation that I'm in. You certainly don't want to waste time actually tying this on station here. So actually make this a little bigger here. Hard to see with these antennae in my face here. Okay, so there's one side. Go ahead and loop that around to one of my shoes here. What I want to do is toss that around. You can toss it around the zip tie, and if you had a single zip tie, you might wind up burning your hands a little bit. It's just kind of the nature of the beast with this kind of movement. So I am going to try to get it between the space that's available between these. We'll see what happens. I won't spend too much time on this, but so this is also a 6-foot section of Kevlar cord. The other thing you can do is, if you don't want to tie a bow line, you could put slip knots in these too. I actually like the strength of the bow line better. So again, what we're going to do here is I'm just going to bicycle my feet. We'll snap right through those. So as you can see, what happened is it just melted right through the plastic. So fairly easy to do. Again, I would recommend, just for the sake of time, to keep those knots tied in this thing as they sit on you, or as it's stored on you, and then you can basically store it in that configuration. So let's move on to the next thing. All right, so one more thing I wanted to address with the zip tie stuff before we leave this is that this method can also be applied when your hands are behind your back. There's a reason I'm not demonstrating it. I have a problem actually doing it, and I'll be the first to admit it. It's not easy to break them behind your back, but the technique, and I've been able to do it very few times. I think I've only done it twice in the entire time and that I've been practicing it these years that I've been kind of demonstrating these techniques. So the principle is that, you know, if your hands are behind your back, you're kind of dropping into a squat, so to speak, and you're basically using your ass to break the cuffs. So it's not an easy way to do this, and there's plenty of other viable methods, as you've seen, to get out of these, that there shouldn't be a reason that you're having to do that. Something you can practice too is actually, you know, getting your hands from your back to your front. Hopefully most people know how to do that. You can kind of wiggle your hands down, and not everybody can do that. Some of the bulkier guys will have a problem doing something like that, but once they're to your front, then, you know, obviously use the braking method or some other type of method too. I have been able to successfully bicycle my feet with the friction saw when they're behind my back. I've been able to just basically reverse that bicycle to actually burn through them too, so that's an option as well. So just wanted to address those things before we move on. So next, let's talk about duct tape. So duct tape's the same principle as zip ties. You may not think that. You might think that, oh, well, you know, I've got duct tape around my hands, I'm not going to be able to get out. Well, there's a couple of things you can do. One is you can try to use a sharp edge. So if you're around a brick corner, you're around a curb, there's other things you can do to kind of burn through these too. And the same thing can happen with zip ties too. I mean, you can actually just you know, basically rub through the zip tie, the plastic zip tie as well, on the edge with some brick or something like that too. But the other thing, you could carry a blade or a small device like we have inside of the Urban Kit, which is a small razor blade. That will cut through duct tape, and as you'll see with the rope in a little bit, it'll do the same for that. So I won't demonstrate actually cutting through the duct tape, but I will demonstrate that that same method with the zip ties can be used for duct tape. So have my assistant here. First of all, I've been doing the zip tie stuff. My wrists are a little red. I'm actually going to, screw it, let's just wrap it. I was going to try to save my arm hair, but it's not going to happen. All right, so take about 3 or 4 passes around here. Go one more, go 4. That's good. All right, so you're in duct tape, same principle, snap right out of it. Arm hair. All right, so that's duct tape. It's really not that difficult. I will say that better duct tape is actually easier to get out of. And I'm not going to use that as a caveat to say that's why I got out so easy, but that is 3M duct tape. It's a little pricier to buy, as most of you know that have bought duct tape before. And you'll know how, you know, the more expensive stuff is easier to tear. So let me see that duct tape again. So if I was actually going to tear a piece of duct tape, you know, the 3M stuff is nice and easy to tear. Some of the cheaper stuff doesn't always tear as easy, so That's essentially what I did too. I don't know if you saw that, but it's just actually tearing right through it. So that same brute force attack type method is just tearing right through the duct tape. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so let's move on now. We'll hit the handcuffs before we go back to the rope. So let's get into how to get out of handcuffs. All right, guys, so this is a pair of Smith & Wesson Model 100s. This is a very common type of law enforcement grade handcuff. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is not to teach you how to get out of law enforcement grade devices, but it just so happens that these law enforcement grade handcuffs are available to literally anybody on the internet. So until the time that either the key design gets changed or the handcuffs get modified to where they're really only available to law enforcement, I have no issues whatsoever showing you how to do this. So here is a common handcuff key. So what you'll see is that in this design, both the ratchet style handcuff and the key design have been largely unchanged since 1916. So that being said, it's been a long time coming. These need an upgrade. I hope that one day we get to that point and that law enforcement officers aren't dealing with some of the downfalls of the handcuff. But at the same time, I do want to say with the caveat that with a proper law enforcement cuffing technique, none of what I'm going to show you is going to work. So just want to tell you that. So that being said, I won't be demonstrating a proper law enforcement cuffing technique. It's beyond the scope of this video, and I really don't care to show it anyway. So it's out there if you want to find it, but you didn't see it from us. So since the original ratchet style design has been upgraded over the years, what's now included is a double lock. So what the double lock does is that most handcuff keys come with this little wedge on the back of them. And what you can do is once you have the handcuff where you need it and clicked in, you can come along with this little thing here and you can push that to the side, and now it's double lock. So which means that you can't push in anymore and you can't pull out anymore. That's a double lock. And to unlock that, you would have to turn one way, disengage the double lock, and so now you can see that little bar, then turn the opposite way and disengage the ratchet. So single lock, let me get the key back out of here. Single lock, I can still press in all day long. That's a single lock, but I just can't pull back out that way. With a double lock, one more time, now I can't pull out or push in. So that's the deal with the double lock. So I've got this handy dandy trainer here, which I'll be using to show you how the handcuff additionally works. So as you were seeing before, the double lock with this trainer handcuff is actually a button that's pushed from the side here. So actually using that same thing, we'll be pushing on that little button and it actually engages this double lock. So what's happening in this handcuff now is that this little slider bar here across the bottom has been pushed in this way, which now, if I turn the key one way, watch this little slider bar down this way. See how that bumped that way? So now the double lock is now disengaged, so now I can continue to ratchet this way, but I still can't pull back out that way. If I rotate the key the other direction, what happens now is if you watch this little bar, see how that moves down and it's disengaging that? That's what we're going to be mimicking to get out of these handcuffs. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this. One, you can either stash a key on you. We include those keys. We've got some little custom molded ITS handcuff keys. So these work just like the other keys. Put them into the lock and they release. And again, show that you can pop the double lock and engage that. Now the double lock is disengaged, and now the single lock. So now you can pull through. So that's that, but one thing that I wanted to demonstrate too is that not only can you have a key on you, but you can also use a bobby pin. So this is one that I've modified a little bit here. Let me show you how to do that. If you take a standard bobby pin, you can pull that apart and you can use some dikes here to snip that off. You want a nice straight edge on there. What you're going to do is insert that into the keyway, and you're just going to bend it just a little bit. So what you want is that kind of bend right about there. What you're able to do with that is actually tuck that under. Get a better angle so you can see this here. Use this side, it'd be easier to demonstrate. So what you're going to be doing is mimicking what you could do with this cuff, which, as I show with the key, what you do is you come in here and you're actually pushing that down. So you can see as that releases, it's disengaging the handcuff. So if you watch closely, that movement moves that ratchet. So we'll do the same thing on these cuffs here. Again, all I'm going to be doing is inserting that into the keyway. And pressing down and releasing the shackle. Try that one more time. I don't know if you could see that. So again, lifting down and releasing the shackle. With a double lock, you can still actually pick this with the bobby pin too. So if I engage this double lock, so now the double lock's engaged, it's not moving forwards or backwards, I can now take that same bobby pin, and instead of now doing this, this isn't going to work because it's double locked. So what I have to do is trace around. There's a lip that you're coming under with the key, and if you watch that, there you go. So now the double lock's engaged. So what I did is actually trace under the lip of that lock. Let me show you on the trainer. So there's a small lip inside the trainer here, and you're tracing around. On this one in particular, it's counterclockwise. Or I'm sorry, clockwise, because you're trying to disengage that double lock. Remember, you're trying to push it that way. So if you can imagine, what I was doing there is I'm actually pushing that device back that way on the double lock. So now that the double lock is disengaged, you can now come back in the other way and hit the single lock as well. Just like that. So the method is just you're pressing this way, you're adding pressure that way. So the other way that you can do this, if the cuffs are not double locked, is you can shim. So shimming, you can do basically with that device that I showed you that's included in our Urban Kit. This is a shim. So what you want to do is insert that in this direction here, but what you're going to do is almost kind of squeeze onto the shackle, and you can just pull that right out. So shimming's great, but what's going to happen is if the cuff is double locked, wrong direction, cuff is double locked, again, I'm not going to be able to push that shim in because I don't have any leeway there to get that shim back in. So it's kind of futile to try to shim a double lock. As you can see, it's just not going to work. So that's one downside to a shim. You can make a shim yourself by using a barrette. I know that sounds a little weird, but so what you can do is simply break the barrette, just like that, and now you've got this little two-sided device, and what you've got is a nice handcuff shim right there. So I'll demonstrate here on the, well, first let me undo the double lock there so I can show you how that works. All right, so now it's single locked. Same principle as before. Shim right out of that. So those are the two methods that I wanted to show. You've either got the hidden handcuff key, you've either got the barrette, or the bobby pin, or the barrette to do the shim. So those are some common methods of getting out of handcuffs. I'd highly recommend one of these trainers. Again, sorry for the sales pitch, but we do sell them on ITS. They're a handy tool, and I certainly advocate using them. So they will help you actually be able to see the inner workings of the handcuff as you're learning how to do this. Okay, so let's talk rope now. We've got a couple of things in that Urban Kit that I wanted to mention. But as I was talking about earlier, if you're bound with rope, use the brick technique. Use anything you can to escape. I mean, if you have access to a different kind of blade on you, you can use that too. But we do include this, which is our folding saw or folding razor saw in the Urban Kit, and it's got not only a saw blade in it, but it's actually got a razor blade as well. But for kind of a deeper concealment, we've got this ceramic razor blade that's a very small little non-magnetic razor blade that comes in this little slip sheath. So I want to demonstrate that both of these can cut this rope. I'm not going to really get into too much on getting out of rope. The thing that I would recommend first, if you're subdued with this method, is to wriggle your hands as much as you can. You want to try to actually loosen up the rope. That's an option too. You could wind up being able to slip out if you were able to loosen the rope up enough, but if not, you're going to need to cut your way out. Or now with a natural fiber rope, you're not going to be able to technically burn yourself out. I ran into a guy at Home Depot that was trying to cut rope for me a couple years back, and he was trying to put this on one of those things that burns nylon rope, and he was very unsuccessful in cutting the rope to the size that I needed. So just so you know, natural fiber rope is not going to melt like nylon rope will. So just an aside there. So this is the folding razor saw. Pretty simple to get out of with that. This is the ceramic razor blade. We'll see how long it actually takes here. But if your hands were behind your back and this was all you had, so not too bad. But that was with some pressure too, and obviously right in front of me rather than behind my back. But it is doable with this little ceramic razor blade. It seems small, but it's actually pretty tough. Ceramic is obviously a fairly tough material. So just a couple methods. I just wanted to demonstrate that with the rope. Again, there's two types of rope, just so you know. There's natural fiber rope like this, and then there's nylon rope. Nylon rope, as I was mentioning, can be fused and melted and things like that. You'll find that more commonly used in water applications because it's not going to rot like natural fiber rope will. So that's just an aside there with some rope too. So that being said, we've kind of covered the gamut of these different methods. So let's recap on everything we learned. All right, guys, so something I wanted to mention as we wrap this up is just to recap everything we've gone over. So we first talked about zip ties, we talked about shimming zip ties, we talked about breaking zip ties, we talked about a little bit about the methodology about breaking them behind your back, as well as something that I didn't mention is the adrenaline factor too. We discussed that brute force is going to be what breaks these things, but at the same time, if you are subdued with these, that adrenaline is going to kick in, and that's going to be what gets you through the situation too. So just remember that. I've seen a lot of people that have broken these before, that once they get a little adrenaline in them, it's a different story. So just be aware of that. And again, don't forget, you can buy lesser grade zip ties if you want to practice at home too, and tape your wrists, so you don't wind up with wrists that look like mine right now. So that's zip ties. We talked about actually friction sawing zip ties too, forgot that, so don't forget that method as well. And then we moved on to duct tape. And again, duct tape is just the same method of breaking, just as the zip ties are. We also mentioned you can cut duct tape and other methods like that, like brick and corners and things like that, so don't forget about those methods. Then we moved on to handcuffs. We talked about shimming handcuffs. We talked about using a key to get out of handcuffs if you have that hidden, and we talked about actually using a bobby pin to pick your way out of handcuffs. So, and just remember that all those methods are no substitute for law enforcement grade cuffing techniques. So again, these methods are not to escape from law enforcement. These methods are to escape from illegal restraint. Big difference there, so keep that in mind. Then we also chatted about rope, as well as some ways to get out of that, including the folding razor saw we have in our Urban Kit, as well as the little ceramic razor blade we have in there as well. So again, some things that we talked about product-wise, just to recap. is the Urban Kit that we sell at ITS, as well as the handcuff trainer that we have as well. Both are great tools to help you in illegal restraint scenarios. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to say that, again, adrenaline is a big thing when it comes to escape from illegal restraint. You're going to have adrenaline. You're going to be amped up. It's going to be a situation you don't want to be in. A lot can occur during those situations. So, you've heard, I'm sure, about people being able to lift cars if they have to get somebody out in a situation. So, you're going to have kind of that He-Man brute strength thing going for you. So, just remember that in a situation you may be able to rely on that, or you probably will be able to rely on that to help you escape. So, again, if you have any questions or concerns, please leave them in the comments. We'll try to address them as we can. Again, this has been what we hope to be a comprehensive guide to escaping from illegal restraint. Thanks for watching.